Coming up, the drama surrounding that Northwest Airlines flight, new details about how controllers finally got in touch with the plane, and we'll have the first comments from one of the pilots involved. Were they sleeping? Were they doing something else? A plane skips past its destination by 150 miles. The pilots were unable to be reached for 80 minutes, and now investigators want to know why. Our third story in the countdown, the fallout continues over Northwest Airlines Flight 188. Today, the plane's black boxes were delivered to the NTSB. Controllers on the ground say they repeatedly tried to contact the wayward plane. The AP reporting the pilots finally realized they were off course when a flight attendant called on an intercom from the cabin. Our correspondent is Kevin Tibbles.
Any investigation into what went on in the cockpit of Northwest Flight 188 may be hampered by this older model cockpit voice recorder, which only records 30 minutes at a time and likely missed the critical moments. The Airbus A320 departed San Diego late, heading east following its cross-country flight path. But instead of landing in Minneapolis, it flew right past it, 150 miles past it, eventually performing a sky-high U-turn at 37,000 feet over Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and headed back to the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport.
Runway 35, clear to land, say the gate.
Clear to land to runway 35, we're going to gate call 14.
Passenger Brent Bjorlin was in row 17 and kept looking out the window.
Why are we still way above the clouds? We can't see any city lights yet. We can't see any ground lights.
Controllers say the pilot stopped responding about an hour before Flight 188 was supposed to land. Calls that were becoming increasingly anxious.
So there was a high level of anxiety, definitely. There were 13 separate attempts by different air traffic controllers to try to establish communications with Northwest 188.
Sources say armed Air National Guard fighter jets were on the runway and ready to scramble if needed.
You just start thinking about the little things that could have happened. Do you run out of gas? You know, do I look out the window and see an F-14 flying next to me? And
once contact was finally established, controllers asked the crew 3 separate times if everything was okay. At first, the pilots responded, "We were distracted," then later added that they were discussing a company issue. But before landing, the pilots were put through a series of maneuvers in the air to prove to controllers they had command of the aircraft.
Northwest 188, descending maintain 6,000, under the speed of 190.
Down to 6,000 and slow to 190 Northwest 188.
Whatever the reason, experts say it's cause for alarm.
I think flabbergasted is even a better word, that you could have a situation where not only do they fly over the airport, but you know, the fact that by 150 miles, that's a pretty big miss.
Upon landing, police say the pilots, identified as Timothy Cheney and Richard Cole, were cooperative and apologetic. Blood alcohol tests found no evidence of drinking. One possibility under investigation is that they may have fallen asleep. The NTSB will be interviewing them on Monday to find out exactly what happened on Flight 188. Kevin Tibbles, NBC News, Chicago.
A short time ago, pilot Richard Cole spoke briefly with our reporter at his home in Salem, Oregon.
I mean, nobody was asleep in the cockpit, and there no arguments took place. But other than that, I cannot tell you anything that went on, because we're having hearings this weekend, we're having hearings on Tuesday. All that information will come out then.
No arguments took place? I mean, that's the statement that's out there all over the place.
There was no arguments at all in the cockpit. That wasn't even an issue. Absolutely not.
Time now to call in the former Inspector General for the U.S. Department of Transportation and current aviation attorney, Mary Schiavo. Thanks very much for your time tonight.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, the NTSB says the black box only records 30 minutes, so we're unlikely to get any objective evidence from that will shed light on what happened. Are there any other sources of objective evidence that you would expect to find in this, excluding for the moment the pilot's own stories?
Well, you obviously, if there was any kind of arguing, which they say that there wasn't, or anything going on in the cockpit, the flight attendants would have been able to at least hear something if they're working in the forward galley. And when the NTSB does question them, obviously they will question them, and they will be probably in this instance placed under oath. I do think that there's a lot of pressure to tell the full story, so I think that's probably the best that they will be able to do.
Has there ever been a story like this? Today I could find one story of a plane overshooting an airport in Hawaii by 18 minutes, and it turned out the pilots were kind of nodding off. They figured it out. But an hour and 20 minutes of inexplicable flying. Have we ever seen anything like this?
No, not like this. I mean, there's been situations which, of course, would be cause for alarm. Remember the Payne-Stewart plane a number of years ago where the pilots had perished, which is why the air traffic controllers were so alarmed. And then, of course, the tragedies of 9/11. There are many instances, it's not as rare as people think, of pilots falling asleep, particularly on long flights across the oceans. It's a big problem, and the FAA has recently done some studies along with the NTSB, but nothing quite like this where there's no explanation for why they were out of touch for an hour.
Now, what kind of hearings and procedures are these pilots facing?
Well, they're facing inquest both by the Federal Aviation Administration, which has authority to examine their operation of the aircraft, whether they should have a certificate action against them, meaning yanking their pilot certificate, etc. And then the NTSB has responsibility for an investigation, and they're already keyed into pilot cockpit coordination and safety issues concerning the pilot's fatigue, coordination in the cockpit, etc. And there were new initiatives announced on October 3rd, so they've flown right into the crosshairs.
Now, just very quickly on this one, they put the pilots through some tests before allowing them to land, maneuver tests. Was that, in effect, a drunk driving test they were putting them through?
Well, not exactly. Well, a drunk driving test, yes, but also a terrorist test. They needed to make sure that the people in that plane were the people who were supposed to be in the cockpit, indeed the pilots for Northwest Delta, and they were really trying to find out if someone had taken over the cockpit, because remember on 9/11 for a while they couldn't contact them, and then they got intercepts.
Mary Schiavo, former Inspector General of the Department of Transportation and author of Flying Blind. Fly Safe. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.